Hello and welcome to this edition of Star Revelations, which we have decided to entitle Shadows, Stones and Serpents. And a big welcome to Maria. Fabulous to see you again.
Hello, I'm just still trying to stop giggling from our discussion before we logged on. We were just having a bit of a laugh at the many lifetimes. And
Many lifetimes we seem to have been here and doing the same job.
let's hope
So
we get it
today
right
we've
this
got a
time.
really powerful episode. We hope it's going to be a really powerful episode for you. Of course, we're going to touch on the astrology, but we also want to look at the shadows, particularly those playing out in Leo season at the moment. We are, of course, going to touch on the stones and the things that are going on within the collective, which are, how should we say, disturbing the energy of the dragon lines, and also touching on the serpent goddess as well, who seems to be just making herself known a little bit more to the pair of us.
Mm.
So I am going to start, particularly because we want to talk about the land today, with a beautiful passage from The Heart of Avalon by Dion Fortune, all of which will be revealed. Third way to Glastonbury, the one of the secret green roads of the soul, the mystic way that leads through the hidden door into the land known only to those with eye of vision. This is Avalon, the heart to those who love her. The mystic Avalon lives her hidden life, invisible save to those who have the key to the gates of vision. The quiet West Country world goes its own way. Seed time and harvest do not fail, nor her inexhaustible wills. The pink foam washes over her apple orchard in its flood. The silver mists of autumn turn her water meadows once again into the lake of wonder. Legend and history and vision of the heart blending with the building of mystical Avalon. So, just really invoking the heart of Avalon today because we're going to talk about a little controversial topic called Bridie's Mound in Glastonbury. Maria, when do you want to start today's podcast? Should we start with some ancient stone bothering first?
Talk about that. And I think the current controversy around Bridie's Mound is part of a wider problem that is happening within all of our ancient temples and sacred sites of this land. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, but also why. Why at the turning of the aeons are we being disconnected from our ritual landscape, which mirrors the cosmos, which is Aquarius?
Absolutely. So maybe we'll just start a little bit talking about Bridie's Mound because it's very much in the forefront
Mm.
of both our minds. So bear in mind, just a little caveat that neither of us live in Avalon permanently, but we do visit there on a regular basis. So when we are part of the wider priestess community. So at the moment, Bridie's Mound, which is a site that not everybody knows about, is currently undergoing some restructuring, shall we say. So it's been taken from a very natural site and there are pathways being placed on it. There's going to be a replica temple being placed on it again. It's going to open up the land. So we want people to access the land, but it's very much in the way that it has been done, the kind of the desecration, perhaps without full consultation. So it is causing a lot of anger, a lot of rift within the community as well, as everyone is now taking sides. So we just want to share kind of our perspective of it, but also how that links into what's going on astrologically and kind of this disconnection from the Great Mother, from the cosmos. So Maria, do you want to share some thoughts around it? Because, it's very controversial, shall we say. A lot of tempers are currently flaring around this.
It is. And as you mentioned when we were chatting earlier, it's very much mirroring the situation we had last summer with the statue in the Chalice Well Garden. So we know that Glastonbury is a place of alchemy and it is a vortex, which can trigger many feelings within many people. And I think what is currently happening here in Glastonbury is, it's really the land showing us what is happening, because these more totalitarian energies are creeping in to our sacred sites. And whatever starts in Glastonbury tends to spread out through the rest of the UK, because it is such an energetic epicenter. And I think I learned that from Kathy, of course. So whatever happens there tends to be a reflection of what is being birthed out collectively. So we can see this kind of energy creeping in. And when we look closely, we can see under the radar that there are many kind of sneaky regulations and restrictions that are being implemented in the other sacred sites, particularly within the southern lands here. I mean, I have been taking groups to Stonehenge. We've had many private sessions at Stonehenge over the years. And the last time I went there, around Beltane this year, without any kind of publicization, as far as I'm aware, they've completely changed the structure of how you go in for a private viewing. So you get very minimal time in there now. I mean, before you only had an hour, but now there's this new system that they're doing where they're splitting you into two groups, and one gets half an hour inside and one has to wait outside for half an hour. So there's this whole different style that is being implemented. And, they're kind of expanding out into Avebury as well, where they're wanting to do tours out into Avebury. Or so the guide told me. So our lovely guide told me. We were lucky because we got a really lovely guide the day that we went there. So this, they are seeking to spread out towards Avebury as well. And you've just informed me this morning, to my absolute rage,
We're calming it down with coffee.
that they are now, at Avebury, they're going to be, and I think the roll rights you mentioned too, and I think there's a lovely lady who works a lot with the roll rights stones on Facebook, the Watchers of the Old Ways, who's been speaking out about,
yeah,
where they're now, shutting things off at equinoxes and solstices on Sabbath days. And I think you've just mentioned to me that they're now going to be, overseeing ceremonies and asking for permits, which, really is interesting when you take all of these things as a collective happening in a very short space of time.
and it's really interesting because before we were doing the podcast, I was kind of doing my kind of research to make sure that what we're talking about is also fact-based as well. And I remember, Stonehenge, you have to pay to park. Okay, that's fair enough. But actually then it's, what is it, £38 if you arrive on the door. But if you're paying for a private session, but actually you probably still paying the same price, but you're only now getting half an hour. Avebury particularly, there's been a lot on Facebook around the National Trust and the rules that they now stating that you can't hold ceremony. Essentially, we are effectively being banned from any kind of worship. That you can't take an organized group into the stones to show them around. You can't do your own guided tour, your own guided walk. Now, I understand sensible rules about not having fires, not causing distress to the stones and people around you, but actually, what is it that is preventing, what is it and why do they want to prevent us having these sacred sites essentially? And I understand people are going to sacred sites, really kind of abusing them, leaving sage burning underneath the Tolkien beech trees because they think it's an offering to the trees. Like, is it really? People are leaving their rubbish, they're tying, non-biodegradable ribbons to trees, which are going to be there for a long, long time. But it isn't about the desecration. It's about actually returning these sites back to sacred worship. And, the question you and I have been chewing over is why? Why? Particularly when we're at the turn of the great Aeon, do they want to do this again? Do they want to lock off the car parks? Do they want to say that pre-COVID, of course, you could have ceremonies at Rollright Stones? This is what the lady was saying very much. She had 260 people at the Rollrights pre-COVID, and she wrote for their newsletter that how amazing this was. Now she can't even hold a single ceremony within the Rollrights. Well, what is it that's going on? Is it English heritage? Is it the National Trust wanting to ban this? Or is it something a lot deeper than this? Who is it that's truly pulling the strings to prevent this from happening, from disconnecting ourselves? And you're right, it's very much happening in the south from my research as well. So if anyone lives kind of I'd say north of Peterborough, do let us know. I know in Yorkshire I'm still pretty much free when I see my parents to go to various sites, but that is going to creep ever further upwards. And I remember you saying that was it Callinash on the Isle of Lewis that they're now putting a visitor centre there. What's going on, Maria? Why?
Yeah, that was what lovely Lynn, who is currently spiraling with us, shared with me, and I think I've seen it maybe in the
Yeah.
Stone Bothering group, which is a great group. If you're not part of the Stone Bothering group, go and check it out because you can find so many sacred sites in your area there. They're brilliant. Um, but what I am pondering here is the Aquarian Aeon and the intention from those in power is to channel us into this very technocratic AI based reality. And of course, the stones in the sacred land are the antithesis to that. They are the very thing that reminds us of our ancestors, of our humanness. They are the thing that reminds us there is so much more to our existence. Even if you're not particularly spiritually minded, if you're going and walking amongst those stones, the giant megaliths of the Henge or the vastness of Avebury, the two most familiar and famous sites here in the UK, even the person who is very disconnected cannot help but wonder, cannot help but have some expansive thoughts. And then when you start to learn of the exact alignments and how these stones mirror the cosmos in such a precise way, probably in more of a precise way than we will ever be able to comprehend. We have a very basic understanding of, oh, the sun rises here at the equinox, or this is the lunar standstill. We have a very basic understanding, but these are very elaborate maps of the cosmos that our ancestors went to great lengths to ensure lasted us for aeons and aeons. And the scope of some of these sites cannot be underestimated. They wanted us to remember. We left them for ourselves to remember.
Absolutely. And that's kind of just making me really reflect because I was rereading Barbara Hand-Clow's Awakening the Planetary Mind actually over the weekend in preparation that I knew we would be talking. And that remembrance that, we left Sphinx, we left the pyramids in Egypt, we are in Leo season, as a reminder of ourselves, as these star temples, as, geometric patterns which we could observe the sky. And how do we do it now? Oh, well, we'll just go out star watching on a nap, right?
Well,
It's
if we can
we've
ever see the stars.
Oh, good point, well made. I haven't seen the stars for a while. But we've left all this in the landscape. So why suddenly are we not allowed to go near it? Who and what? I guess the elite or however the powers that be, what are they truly afraid of? And I think it is the fact that when we touch a stone, it almost reenacts the kind of hidden DNA coding that we have, and it reawakens a part of our brain, our cellular memory, think kind of epigenetics, that actually brings knowledge to the fore, whether it's being able to prophesy. Think of the seat in the prophecy seat in Avebury, where you and I have both sat and,
Absolutely.
kind of come out with, oh, that's interesting. We reconnect, we see visions, we're able to intuit more, we reclaim our power. It could be a surge into our kind of womb space of creativity. So for us, that's quite normal. For us, that's kind of the way we live our life. But why are people so afraid of us reconnecting to that power? Because, as you say, the antithesis of this AI generation is to be back with nature, to be back with cycles. There's like there's a dark, shadowy aspect of working against Earth, of working against everything that we truly know. It's, go back to the Matrix. We tried to block out the sun, but we became a power source. So what is it that someone is really trying to achieve? And let's be honest, it's making a lot of people very angry that we can't get to these sites. Just to be and commune with the stones. I'm getting rage filled. I'm going to pass the talking over.
I know we were just talking before we pressed record. Actually, when we were saying how many lifetimes have we even given our lives trying to protect these landscapes and these
Yeah,
stones and preserve these mysteries? Because that's what they are. They're a living, breathing record of what was.
yeah.
And I think, part of it is that these sites, they're on the dragon lines, they're on the body of the Serpent Mother, who
Mm,
again is the earth, and is most displeased about the the current evolution in society. It's that kind of serpent kundalini lay dragon energy. The
mm,
defenders of Albion have always been the dragon line or the serpent line, the Melusine energy, which
mm,
we've just been connecting with in Brittany, where the Serpent Mother is very present, and the stone circles there are very much a mirror to the ones that we have here. So I
mm,
think part of it is to really disconnect us from these earth grids. And if we think of all of the sacred sites in the land, as one vast cosmic map, and these sites aren't separate, you know, they are sister sites. They are all linking in with each other. So we go from one to the other and we carry the
mm.
energy. Yeah, when I was sat in Karnak with the Serpent Stone, you can read about that a little bit on my blog if you haven't seen it. And the goddess in the land very clearly said to me that, oh, we haven't had a priestess of Avalon here for a while. So they remember. They remember your soul essence. They remember your soul signature. Yeah. And part of our role as priestesses, as druids, as earth keepers, as wisdom keepers throughout all of these different aeons would have been to travel around these sites to share wisdom, to share truth, to keep the earth in balance.
Mm.
You can think of them almost as a grid of the tree of life around the earth, or a cosmic or celestial map, mirrored upon the land. So, of course, if you want to disconnect a species from their origins, it's the same as if you wanted to disconnect Christians from God or Jesus, you would stop them from going into their churches.
Which is an interesting point because I went to Winchester recently, and Winchester has a cathedral, and from a medieval historical perspective, quite an interesting place to go. The pregnant queens were locked in there with the treasury to secure the future of the country. And
Oh,
it was what, 14, £15 each to go into what I would regard as a sacred site still, because they're often built on the ley lines. And then I was reflecting on this and remembered that, my home minster, York Minster, uh, Peterborough Cathedral, Winchester Cathedral, Westminster Abbey, they're all about £15 to visit. So actually, people are being disconnected from the Christian worship and religion by not being able to access their sites either. So very interesting that you mentioned that because to me, we're also being barred from churches as well.
And I think those ancient churches and abbeys, as you say, they are also built on serpent lines, but
Yes.
also there is a very, just thinking of, Glastonbury Abbey and the Vesica Pisces, there's a very specific geometric architecture
Indeed.
to a
Mm.
lot of those churches. So although, there is the disconnect from them, people are being kind of funneled into these more modern church buildings which don't have the same energy or atmosphere or invocation of remembrance of the lineage of Christianity either.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, and I think the key thing here is that they want AI to become the new religion.
Mm.
That's always been the plan as far as I know.
Absolutely. And just as you were talking, I was thinking about Glastonbury Abbey. I was taking my mind back to York Minster, which comes us back to Bridie's Mound. Bear with me, because Bridie's
Mhm.
Mound would have been a daub and wattle church building, roundhouse. York Minster was built on a daub and wattle original church when Ethelberga converted Edwin to Christianity with her priest Paulinus. Now, what was interesting is that Hilda, St. Hilda, the creator of St. Hilda's Abbey in Whitby, was Edwin's sister essentially, and she links us back to the serpents because on the moor she would walk with the staff and the serpents would freeze to stone as she walked. So she's taking us back to the Serpent Mother, but coming back to kind of Bridie's Mound, these daub and wattle buildings, which is the plan for the centre or whatever it is to be built on Bridie's Mound, it's kind of coming full circle, isn't it? It's this kind of putting a man-made structure onto a ley line, essentially. And as much as people say they can move the ley lines, I truly believe they can't be. I don't see how we can be so egotistical to move a ley line. They are where they are for a reason, right?
That
We
is
can't. But it's
somewhere.
just this interesting, this kind of snake theme, this kind of, building on mounds, the ley lines. It's really calling us to actually do something and to really work with the land as well and to listen to what she is saying to us.
Absolutely. That's so interesting about moving the ley lines, isn't it? That's some real Mercury retrograde in Leo hubris, isn't it? Um,
Yes.
and I think there is a lot of talk at the moment around this. The energy is moving from this sacred site, it's not there anymore, and this, that, and the other. But I think what is happening is the energy is not being respected or protected, so it is withdrawing. And I think, there is um, this sense of, we're using these sites for our own benefit rather than being devotional and respectful. So,
Mm.
these are places where we go to worship the goddess, to lay offerings for the goddess, to honor the turning of her wheel. They're not places where we, go and they are not designed to be used by everyone for everything.
Very subtly put. Very subtly put. And particularly around this kind of controversy around Bridie's Mound, because Brigantia is the goddess of, the Isle of Avalon, of
Mm.
Albion, sorry. And just kind of thinking about that when there was the controversy around the chalice well, everybody got involved, didn't they? From near, far, from everywhere. Yet, and it's just as important sacred site, but maybe one that's lesser known, hasn't attracted as much attention because of where Bridie's Mound is. Obviously, within Avalon itself, it's kind of hidden away. it always fascinates me that those who say that they are dedicated onto the pathway will only do the shiny, shimmery protesting and not the actual boots on the ground. This is what is truly happening as Glastonbury appears to be going for its World Heritage status. The spiritual leaders outside of Glastonbury are very quiet at the moment. Yet when it came to the Chalice Well, they were very vocal.
Yeah. Well, I think, there is this thing, isn't there, like where people are very cautious about speaking out in case it affects their following or their image or their credentials in some way. But I think again, that isn't necessarily the pathway that we're on, is it? Those of us
No.
who feel called to the land will defend the land in the best ways that we can. And I think it just, that takes us back to what we've discussed here many times, isn't it, with the spiritual illusion and the spiritual persona, which is so dominant during Leo season. And we always have to be reflecting on that wherever we are in the journey. None of us are exempt from it, because the human condition is to want to be liked, hey, to want to be loved. But we do have to be very aware of where we are, stepping back from our authenticity, from that desire to be liked or to have a million followers or whatever it is. But I think, that curtain is falling.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah. And I always describe Pluto and Aquarius as a wrecking ball through the spiritual community as well, as that would really truly expose everything that's going on. If Pluto and Capricorn was the wrecking ball through kind of institutions, Pluto and Aquarius to me is the wrecking ball around spirituality and spiritual leadership as well, which
Mm.
kind of makes it very interesting to see kind of what is going on and how this Pluto and Aquarius is bringing in different energies. And just wanted to just throw in a little bit of astrology, which you can kind of talk about that Saturn Jupiter square that we're kind of experiencing at the moment. Jupiter and Cancer really defending the land. And we were chatting earlier that this Saturn Jupiter square started, was it around COVID? Was it the January, wasn't it? COVID?
So yeah, we were thinking, weren't we? Because we've been talking about this Jupiter and Cancer energy, haven't we, in defending
What is
the
dear
land.
to
And
us? Yeah.
we were thinking about, war and people defending their homeland, which is absolutely happening. But on our, it's also manifesting in the ways that we're talking about today as well, with defending our homelands, our sacred sites, our mother temples. And yeah, it's very interesting because this Jupiter Saturn cycle, this conjunction, happened alongside Pluto in Capricorn, at the onset of COVID, in early 2020. And as Jupiter came into Cancer and Saturn came into Aries, they've got this first quarter square. So again, this is the restriction, this is the Saturnian authoritarianism, the kind of militant Saturn and Aries energy, meeting this Cancerian, Jupiterian goddess energy, and she is the goddess of the moon. Cancer is the moon serpent goddess. She is the one who has the cycles and rhythms, who moves from full to dark. And I think, the serpent goddess, the ley lines, this energy is really stirring, isn't it? Because this gentle goddess moon energy is not going to help us combat the authoritarianism.
Absolutely. Just remembered someone's comment of, shovels at dawn, isn't it? Because, Friday's man was with shovels at dawn, but there has been a very kind of soft, feminine, oh, let's not fight it, let's kind of go with the flow. But this is really, really asking us to step up into what I'm being shown is that the warrior priestess, we can be, beautiful and run through cornfields with linen. But actually, at the moment, this is about, putting your jeans on, your mucky old t-shirt, and actually going and doing things to make sure that we are truly, truly heard. And I think in the community as well, kind of seeing this from the wider view without any judgment, is we have to make sure that we are all leading from our hearts and all leading for the same thing, and not using these aspects of what's going on, the banning from sacred sites, the expansion of sacred sites, the World Heritage sites, to actually polarize us and cause further division and further friction within the wider community as well, because we're bringing back the old Aeon. The Aeons are turning. So let's, rather than, grouping together and working for the greater good, is like, let's just split off. Let's hive off again. Let's create more division and discourse. And I think we have to be so careful. And you and I are seeing this already, is that there's now this kind of side taking. And this isn't going to get us access back to sacred sites. It is actually going to cause, I can see, further issues, because it's really challenging us to work for the greater good or
Just
not.
thinking, if you are a controlling energy or entity and you are faced with a group of very powerful, magical women, the best way for you to destroy that power is to separate them.
Absolutely.
So, there's always agendas and things at work, and that's been going on since the beginning of time, hey? Which is why a lot of us have these deep sister wounds, because we are so powerful if all of us are together, focused on one vision. But as we're talking, I'm just thinking, I've just got the images, of the priestesses from the famous story, when the Romans came to Anglesey, when they're just on the cliffs in their black cloaks, screeching curses or whatever Tacitus said it was, obviously doing magical invocations, trying to scare away the Romans. And I'm just thinking maybe we should bring that back.
Yes, I'm there. Hand me my cloak.
Do it again in this lifetime. But I think the deeper question is why.
Oh, absolutely.
And why so coordinated in such a short space of time?
Isn't it? And if you think about all the sites around the world, because you said Karnak was now a World Heritage Site, you've got World Heritage Sites all over the world. Just trying to think of some quickly. I think Egypt has got one of them. I'm sure Pompeii and Vesuvius, Herculaneum are as well, which, again, even though they were kind of desecrated by a volcano, there's still quite a lot of power there. There's still quite a lot of temples there as well. So it is this agenda to control, essentially. And we can go down as many uh, tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theories as we want to, but it essentially boils down to those who are in charge understand the power of goddess, and they don't want us to access our innate abilities, our innate power, our innate sorcery, because then they fall from grace. It's the shadow of Leo, isn't it? They want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to control. But at some point, we have to make that decision who actually fully step into our power, because we're at the turn of the great Aeon again. We didn't do it last time. We didn't do it the time before, or probably the time before that. So actually, are we going to do it differently this time? Is the big question as well. But why? Why? Again, I can't answer the question why, other than to say there's probably a bunch of men in grey suits somewhere cooking up a plan.
I think the question is, as we have done in every Aeon, we have survived and we have preserved the memory of goddess despite
Mm.
the infiltrations of religion and witch burnings and Romans. Her power is still there, and it is the power in the land, right? It is the serpent power in the land. So if we don't have access to these temples, which has always been a reminder what new ways can we preserve those mysteries in a world where everything might become digital? So there might be no physical things left. What do we do? And I think it's the kind of energetic imprint that we cultivate and leave while we are alive here, like those women of the Golden Dawn, like Dion Fortune, like naughty
Yeah.
Mr. Crowley, like
Jack.
yeah, Jack, and some of the more powerful spiritual leaders of our
Mm,
time, like Kathy, leaving those threads for future generations to find in one way or another. Um, so that is something that we can all work to cultivate. We can all work to cultivate our own consciousness, because they can um, disconnect us from every sacred site, but they can't disconnect us from the sacred site that is the body. They can't completely
absolutely.
disconnect us from the earth. So you were mentioning earlier about, working to create new sacred sites
Mm,
as well, which, is something that can be done. Again, in Glastonbury, we see, the first goddess temple in the British Isles. That's
absolutely.
um, fairly newly created compared to Stonehenge, but you go in there and the energy is there.
Yeah. And that
Mm,
really gets me thinking as well. So for me, our garden essentially is dedicated to the goddess. We're cultivating our patch of land to make sure we're leaving that kind of energetic imprint. And I think we can all do that if we have access to a small piece of outside, whether you've got a garden or not. There should be somewhere you can go just to put your feet on the ground, just in remembrance and reconnection. It's almost this, let's have a bit of reclamation of places like public parks now. That's part of her body as well. But it's what can we do? What imprint can we leave? And it's yeah, it is about creating sacred sites, but actually carrying and holding the energy in the land that we can actually have access to at the moment as well. It's really, really got me thinking actually, how can we dedicate small spaces to her as well as the big sites that we're not allowed into at the moment?
yeah. And I think, yeah, even your home becomes a temple to the goddess. It's very
Exactly.
Cancerian, right? Very Jupiter and Cancer.
Yeah.
Everywhere in my home, there are crystals, there are images of the goddess. Her image is in every room.
Oh,
In the house, there are goddess statues, and I'm just looking at my fridge now, and we've got Sekhmet on the fridge, and
yes.
beautiful Gaia statue sat right next to me as I'm talking, which was a beautiful gift from the first year of the spiral students. Got a crystal grid on the kitchen table, and everything
Mm,
can become that sacred site. Um,
absolutely.
so I think it's important that we cultivate a strong connection to where we are and to
Mm,
our own consciousness as well, while we are also doing this sacred work.
mm. Absolutely. And you're right. Then it actually comes down to our body. It comes back to the adage, our body is our temple as well. So actually, however we do it is making sure that we are that, we're that temple and we're cleansing it and keeping that in that shape as well, which I guess for me really nicely segues, thinking of temples, into the other part that we were talking about and kind of Lionsgate, the rising of Sirius, kind of thinking back to when you and I, many lifetimes, would have been in ancient Egypt. We're obviously in Leo season at the moment, and we have Lionsgate portal on the 8th of the 8th, apparently. So we just want to go into that a little bit, kind
Yeah,
of dive into that from an astrological and an astronomy kind of point of view, and just kind of reclaim it a little bit for Goddess, perhaps. Do you
that's
think?
so funny. We speak about Leo and the cats appear. Um, but yeah, just I was just going to quickly touch on from an astrological point,
Mm,
that it's very interesting that the kind of controversy around Bride's Mound has exploded on social media as Mars in Virgo, the defender of the sacred, the druid, conjunct the
Absolutely.
south node of the past,
Ooh.
the south node of release, and that is very rare. The south node only moves through Virgo once every 18 years, and I'm not sure the last time it was conjunct Mars in Virgo. Actually, I'll have to look back through the cycles, because obviously Mars isn't, Mars takes 2.5 years to go around the zodiac as well. So, this south node in Virgo and the upcoming eclipse in Virgo as well, which feels really powerful, is really going to amplify all of this, So as we go into Virgo season, I would expect a lot more of this to start bubbling up to the surface as well. The sign of the priestess. Virgo is our archetypical earth priestess type energy. So that was just coming into my mind. So I just wanted to drop that in case some people are still interested in astrology.
Or we've gone off today. You're absolutely right. And I often find Virgo season as well is the time of year where I've always dedicated myself into my own kind of personal practices, my own rituals. You kind of start looking after yourself. It's that back to school feeling as well. So I feel that that is the time of really kind of anchoring into Goddess if you haven't already.
Absolutely. It's a time that the initiations take place in a lot of the Avalon priestess traditions as well. I mean, we work with the stars, so we do it in bulk. We do it in Bridie's
In the
time.
dark.
But a lot of the priestess traditions and a lot of the rituals, like the Eleusinian mysteries, would take place during that time of year. So just a little side note with that. But yes, the Lion's Gate. So we have to touch on this a bit because it's become such, again, a polarizing and controversial topic on social media, isn't it? You've got one faction, which is, Lionsgate codes, this and that. And then you've got the other, much more serious astrologers going, there is no Lionsgate. This is nonsense. But I'm somewhere in the two, in between the two. I think we've got slightly confused, The AA energy is a numerologically based date within Leo season. And of course, the Lion's Gate, which a lot of people say is about abundance and sovereignty and power. These are all Leonine themes. But what is actually significant at this time of year is the rising of Sirius, which would have been very important to the Egyptians during the age of Leo.
Because
So,
obviously, when the Nile flooded, we knew when we were planting crops, we knew where we were in the year starts again. It's abundance, isn't it? And it's funny how in, part of the UK now, kind of looking outside, this is the harvest. We're coming
it
to
is.
Lammas.
It is. And of course, to the Egyptians, Sirius rising was the reappearance of Isis. To them, it was Sophis. It was a celestial representation of the goddess. The star and the goddess were one and the same, which we would also see here in the Celtic Isles. There's a really great book called The Star Temple of Avalon, where Nicholas Mann talks about the importance of Sirius cycles and what it meant to the Avalonian star watchers as well. So the rising of Sirius, in astrology we call this a heliacal rising, which means that she makes her first appearance before the sun, on the horizon, in the morning skies. So similar to Venus, when we see morning star Venus or morning star Mercury, it's this big celestial event, that the ancestors would have been, holding in great importance. And again, a lot of the temples on Malta built to align with Sirius, and we can actually see that the temples on Malta, similar to some of the ones in Brittany, they've actually been realigned and rebuilt as the processional cycle moved, so that the
Change.
entrance would always align with the rising of Sirius, with the rising of certain stars. So that's how important these temples were, these places were, for channeling cosmic energy, right? for the ancestors. So this reappearance of Sirius would have been traditionally celebrated at this time of year, which is actually usually around the 13th of August. It depends where you are in the world. It depends on your kind of longitudes and latitudes, but generally it's around the same time as, you know, this Lionsgate, Leonine Lionsgate drama explodes on social media. But this year, it's really interesting because not only have we got Mercury going direct in Leo around this time, but also we've got the conjoining of Jupiter in Cancer with Venus and Sirius around this time, around the same time period, the 11th, 12th, 13th of August. So this is some really beautiful energy. So this is a, you know, for me, this is a truly beneficent, abundant moon, lunar, womb goddess type energy. And one of our lovely students, TJ, she's done an amazing video on this with Kaylin Castell, who is another amazing goddess astrologer. So maybe we can pop that somewhere in the link as well for people that want to go into more depth around that. But Sirius herself, you know, to the ancient astrologers, was the most beneficent star. She is, in occult terminology, the sun behind the sun. So she's the light of the universe, you know, she's the blue ray, the star ray. And for me, I associate her with spiritual abundance and spiritual nourishment. So if there was ever a day for ritual and ceremony within the sacred sites, if there was ever a time period that would be beneficial, it would be then. So, you know, there are many different layers to this astrological period. But I think, you know, the Lionsgate is one of those things which, again, you know, on social media, we see a lot of people who will use things for, you know, post controversial things to create attention, to, you know, push themselves up in the algorithm. So, you know, I think we have to just be really aware of what sources our information comes from.
Yeah, and I think this year particularly, I have noticed an explosion of Lionsgate. So I've always been aware of it. You know, I've held workshops on it, I've attended workshops on it. And then last year I had a very strong message from Goddess that, you know, these numerological portal days, like 779988, actually were no longer part of my path, which was really, really interesting because actually they have been taken, and there's always a, I wouldn't say a commercial aspect to it, but there's been a dumbing down of exactly the power of some of these numbers and not being aligned to kind of the astrological cycle. So I have noticed a real explosion. In fact, and they're not listening, so I can say it. You know, I've even seen people wanting to launch fitness plans on that day because it's Lionsgate, you know, and it's like, but we'll only take, you know, a certain number of people through this, and it'll be, you know, £88 and 88 pence. And it's like, well, actually, we're now starting to kind of take away from what is actually going on. You know, you can have your galactic high priestess Andromedan codes from, you know, the back end of Scorpio kind of, you know, constellation. You can have all this going on, you know, you could maybe get in touch with a Starlink for all I'm, you know, interested in, but actually being really discerning. You never know, you know, the worship of Starlink as the new AI goddess. Um, Sorry, what you can't see on the podcast, if you're listening kind of on the audio and not watching us on YouTube, that Maria's now just completely dissolved into giggles. Just throw me off. But what I'm trying to say is actually that, what am I trying to say now? I can't stop laughing because I'm watching your face. But it's this kind of explosion. It's about discernment, essentially. It really is. Where is this information coming from? And what are you doing with this information? Is it coming from someone wanting to be controversial on social media? Is it coming from someone who has, and I don't want to say this word, but I am going to kind of bastardize the meaning of what is actually going on in order to be seen? I think this again, it's the veil of illusion, isn't it? It's the spiritual narcissism that's really coming through. And it's actually being really discerning and following the truth of your own path as well, and realizing that if you are on that pathway, there is only so much our temples can take, our bodies can take when it comes to galactic encoding and receiving new upgrades. Actually, what I'm going to say to you is whether you celebrate 8/8 or not, it's just get outside, get on the land, reconnect back with your energy, reconnect back with the energy of the earth before we're too interested in what is going on kind of galactically. Because actually, if on the 13th, when we have this kind of Venus Jupiter conjunction, the most powerful thing you can do is reconnect yourself, reconnect the land, reconnect the goddess, invoke the old ways in order for us to transition into the new Aeon. Rant over. Thank you. She speaks. Having spoken, she's quiet again.
All hail the goddess of the Starling. That's
When she comes through, she gets quite animated. I do apologize.
yeah. Well, I think it is this, this serpent goddess energy, isn't it? Which is fierce. In Egyptian
Very.
times, it was a cobra goddess. It was a cobra goddess energy, and we know that they are not the most relaxed of the serpent family. But I think, the idea is that we are supposed to be the standing stones. We talk about this a lot in the spiral training, hey, where we are the standing stone, the bridge between the earth and the cosmos. So it's almost like disconnecting us from the sites, from the rituals, from the true festivals, because, that's a whole maybe podcast subject in itself. But,
Yes.
these numerological dates, and numerology is extremely important, but these, and geometry is, the basis of all creation, right? But the dates that we have are based on a Gregorian calendar. They're based on the patriarchal calendar. And even, the days that we celebrate the cross-quarter festivals, Imbolc, Beltane, Lammas, and Samhain, are slightly off.
Mm.
The dates are off. They should be celebrated at the exact midpoints, the 15-degree points between the solstices and equinoxes. But now, we often have them a few days before or a few days after, so it fits with those first of the month type dates, things like Beltane becoming May Day and things like that. So again, we're slightly disconnected. And in the book, The Sun and the Serpent, whose authors I can't bring to mind, but it's a very famous book on ley lines and sacred sites. They say that these cross-quarter days, the true cross-quarter days, are actually the days when the light of the sun, the soul star, activates the dragon lines, particularly around the Taur. So we're celebrating them, we're slightly off, which I think is interesting.
Now I know that from doing the spiral, it is actually I do shift my celebrations now. So the more of us who actually shift back into that true alignment, I think will be incredibly powerful. Actually, why are we fitting in with a man-made calendar rather than the kind of female goddess calendar herself? It's yeah, it's a fascination of how we've got disconnection from these dates to fit into a structure that doesn't really serve her, doesn't really serve how women work. Um, because, powers that be like a rigid structure, don't they? Whereas the feminine structure would mean that, Samhain would be a different date every year. So actually you can't, if you're a supermarket, plan for, Samhain being, say, the 7th of November, but actually on the 31st of October, you're going to have all your sales. So you can see how it's been distorted and manipulated for consumerism as well, particularly around Samhain, actually.
Oh
But
yeah,
yeah, I think that's
absolutely.
really, really important, because if we take the 15 degrees, which haven't got an ephemeris to check, then actually that moves Lammas towards 8-8 and very, very close to that kind of conjunction of Venus, Jupiter, and Sirius as well.
It absolutely does. And you know, that's the exact halfway point. That is the exact cross quarter between the solstice and the autumnal equinox. So, you know, my thought is, you know, it's just nice to celebrate it for the whole week.
And
Just
a
celebrate the
chance to
whole week.
celebrate twice, right?
Yeah.
Crack open the cake and mead, people.
Absolutely. But it is, you know, these slight distortions are interesting when you think of the energetics and the preciseness of the alignments the ancients left for us.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe we could do another circle where we talk about the metatonic cycles of the moon, because you know, so many of these alignments are moon based because they are from pre-patriarchal times. You know, there's always a big focus, particularly around Stonehenge, on it being like a solar clock, but it's not.
It's the lunar clock.
Mm-hmm. So yes, we're in the
I
age of
feel
Cancer,
like we have
maybe.
discovered and covered quite a lot today. There were a
Mhm.
couple of things just as we kind of draw to a close, because I think we could go on for a long time, but we will kind of just bring it to a close. Couple of things to mention then. Our planetary magic course starts on the 25th of September. We'll put all the details in the show notes, but given everything that's going on, given the fact that we are being asked to cede our power to AI, this is going to be a perfect time for the reclamation of yourself, reclamation of your sovereignty, and to follow in the footsteps of those women of the Golden Dawn, of Dion Fortune, to really, you know, become the sorceress of your own reality, essentially, to quote the beautiful words by Maria. So we will put all that down in the show notes as well. And Maria, stars and stones.
Yes, come visit the sacred sites where you're still allowed. But yeah, joking aside, it is more important than ever that we reclaim our sacred spaces. And it's really interesting to me because I have a lot of people message me and say the stones are calling me.
Mm.
And as many of you know, over the past 2 years, I've visited nearly every stone temple in the UK, and obviously been over to Brittany recently as well. And I now we can see what is unfolding. You know, the topics that we've been talking about today is quite clear why I've been led down that pathway. So as we do the stars and stones this year, we'll be going off to the sacred sites of the south, some of the lesser known ones in August, around the time of that conjunction. We'll be going to Cornwall for the lunar eclipse in Virgo. So we'll do some really powerful work down there at that time, because those are circles that are aligned with these eclipse cycles, these metatonic cycles of the moon. And then, of course, Anglesey, which at the last turning of the Aeon was the site that was defended until the end. Yeah.
And I do believe I definitely had a bit of a sticky end there.
Yeah, probably all of us together, I would imagine.
Mm.
We'll get our black cloaks and head towards the cliffs. But Anglesey, I find, you know, for those of us who do remember these turnings of the aeons, is such a powerful spot. There's a particular place on there that I really love, which is called the Lake of Offerings. Lyn Cerrig, I think, in Welsh. Probably pronounced that totally wrong. But, you know, there is evidence there of the offerings that our ancestresses made in order to invoke the spirits to defend and protect the land at this last turning of the aeon. So their kind of memory is echoing on through us. And for me, Anglesey is somewhere where I really remember that because of my own soul memories. And, you know, as you've just said, and I think that's the gift of visiting these sacred sites, is they remind you of who you've been and who you are. So you're touching the stones that you've touched in those other lifetimes. And we would have all been circling around. I think those of us who have a connection to Avalon, who were training in Avalon, you know, we would have journeyed to Anglesey. We would have journeyed to Kano. We would have gone over to Brittany. You know, these were sites of teaching and exchange. So I think it's far beyond our comprehension in many ways. But, you know, now is the time.
Indeed. Indeed. And for those of you feeling the call of Avalon, I am running a 3-day retreat in Avalon as well in October, which will be in English and also in German for those of you who want to do a bilingual retreat. So a Goddess Awakening retreat where we're going to be walking the land. We're actually going to walk between the age of Pisces, the age of Aquarius, so go between the two constellations, as Maria and I have done several times before. Going to sacred sites. We've got private session in the White Spring, private session in St Margaret's Chapel as well. So lots of ceremony, lots of work on the land as well. So we'll put all the details of planetary magic, stars and stones, Glastonbury retreats all in the show notes, and everyone is always welcome to join us. But it's been a pleasure as always, Maria. Thank you.
It's been rage-filled fun.
And we will be back very shortly. Perhaps maybe even in the next couple of episodes with some very special guests. So thank you so much for listening to us, and we're sending you so much love, and we'll speak to you soon.